It's very enormous, and it doesn't happen that often. The last time it happened was when Netanyahu threatened to fire Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and that was in 2023. So really, like over a year ago. But basically, in Israel, the way it works is all the unions of the whole country are under one umbrella union. So it's the postal service, the schools, the hospitals, the transportation, the airport, pretty much anything you would want to do, right, is under that umbrella. When they call a strike, that's essentially paralyzes the whole country. There's very, very little can happen. And that's, and the symbolism of that is that even the airport is shut down. Can't get in, you can't get out. You just can't do much of anything.
Mm.
And that's why you don't call it that often. But it's a very powerful tool that Israel has as a country to push back at policies by the government that
Well,
people don't agree with.
well, tell us, what does the scale of today's strike action and also those anti-government protests we've seen in recent days, what do they all say about how Israelis are feeling about the situation in Gaza right now?
Well, I think, there is a deep divide in the country, right, on certain key issues. I think you saw that when it came to all the democracy protests, right, that there was X amount of people that wanted reform and Y amount of people that didn't. And it's the same thing on the issue of the hostages. The hostages issue rests on some central security questions that some people, half the country feels should go one way and half of the country feels should go other way. Those people who think we should make a hostage deal now, who think that the first and topmost priority should be the hostages, believe that because they think that the hostages are in danger, that every day that they're there is a day that you're risking lives, right? There's been I think this is roughly right, okay, 26 hostages that actually have died or been killed while in captivity. So when you have six hostages like this that were alive until 3 days ago, some of whom would have already maybe even been out if we had made this deal in July, it's such a reminder, a painful reminder of what could be and what should be and why they need to fight. Like if you think you're really risking lives, then the extent to which you're going to go and stand, saving lives, the extent to which you're going to go and stand in the streets is just that much greater.
How complex is it for the Netanyahu government to come to an agreement on the release of hostages?
It's both simple and complex, right? So on the basic level, the part where Netanyahu gets a lot of criticism for is that there is the potential that the deal that's on the table or the kinds of concessions that we have to make could collapse his government, right? So there's the very real political reality that the government could come down. But there's also a very real security divide, right? So when you have a hostage deal, what you do is you pit the lives of people in the present with the lives of people in the future. You say our most important goal is to get the people that we know are at risk home, and we'll deal with the future later. Then the second group of people says, yeah, that future is not so far away, and you're also risking the lives of people in the future to get hostages home now. So the Netanyahu government has some very real concerns, and it's not sure that it wants to put them aside, right? Hamas wants to stay in power, so it wants a permanent end to the war, and it wants a full IDF withdrawal from Gaza. This government thinks that having Hamas in power in Gaza is dangerous. It points to October 7th, the rockets as proof of that. It thinks, that Israel should hold on to the Philadelphia corridor. That's a buffer zone between Egypt and Gaza, under which for years Hamas was smuggling weapons. So the fact that Hamas controlled that border was what helped it launch rockets at Israel and carry out October 7th. So Israel says, yeah, we can't withdraw from that. Other people say, yeah, you can do it temporarily to make a deal and get the hostages back. So it's, for people who are opposed to the deal, they think they're creating an existential threat. And for people who support the deal, they think the absence of a deal creates a very real existential threat for the hostages, and that the terms are not an existential threat for Israel. And you have that very pitched battle between people who this year have felt like their country is at risk, getting played out politically on the streets of Israel while the IDF itself is fighting enemies on both of its borders.
And Tova, meanwhile, it's such a difficult time for the families of the hostages who have been
Oh, yeah.
taken. What do we know about the most recent hostages whose bodies were found over the weekend?
Oh, well, there were originally 251 hostages taken, and out of those, there were some stories that certainly gained more international attention than others. Noah Argamani being one of them. So the rescue really touched people because she was one of the poster faces. Well, one of the poster faces of these group of 251, I should say that now, of course, there's like 97 and only 66 alive, so it's a much smaller group, but still the poster group of the remaining poster captive of the remaining hostage group has really been a young man who has dual American Israeli citizenship named Hirsch Goldberg Poland. And he, becomes one of the poster faces, one, because he acted so heroically to try and save others when he was taken from the Nova Film Festival and lost part of his arm. And he's a musician, so this was really like a big thing. And because his parents, Rachel and John, have just been an unbelievable moral and empathetic um, voice for all of the people held in Gaza, and they've gone everywhere. They've spoken on every stage, the UN, the Democratic Party convention, like just everywhere. And people have really felt for these parents who at first didn't know about the fate of their son and then did. And in April, there was a video released showing that he was alive. So all of a sudden, there was a lot of hope. They probably knew that he was slated to be released if in the first phase of what is a three-phase deal. So they would have been really feeling like almost their journey. It's sort of almost like being killed on the last day of the war. Plus, he's very young. He's 23, really had his whole life in front of him.
Well, Tova, how much pressure do you think today's protest will put on the government to come to a deal?
I think at the end of the day, I want to be cautious about it. But right now, I think look, last night, the security cabinet met, right? And based on the comments that were, so these are closed door meetings, obviously. So I was not at the meeting. But based on comments that were leaked, including to me from the meeting, what you could see is the government building an argument about why the death of the hostages means you can't cave now, right? It would actually prove that if you kill hostages, to Hamas, that if you kill hostages, you'll get more. Whereas the other people think that what Hamas feels is that if they're not going to have them, if there's no hope of a deal, then there's no point of keeping hostages. So I'm not sure that this government yet has felt like it has to change course. I think what's going to probably be more telling for this government is behind the scenes pressures particularly from the United States. Remember, this was also an American citizen in the American government. Actually, 8 of those held are Americans, and including Hirsch. And so, the American government takes that issue very seriously. So it would be, I think, more pressure from Washington than I think public protests, because those public protests also didn't necessarily stop the push by the government to change Israel's judicial system. But we'll see. It's a lot. You have a long day ahead of you, maybe a long 2 days, and I wouldn't call it yet.
Well, Tovah Lazaroff, really great to talk tonight. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity.